clothes. To add to it, to the experience, not only of acting together with a group of people continuously and in repertory and with the same people and with the writers on the project. So the writers were there with the actors all the time. The director was there with the actors. The producer was there with the actors. Everybody was, the scenic designer was there with the actors. So it was a collective piece of work that was being done, and it was what the theater really is like the different fingers on your hand. They don't really make a fist until you put them all together and tighten them. Then you have a fist and you have a production. And it was not only that we were together all the time during the 4 hours that we were creating, but then at night you would meet in the City Projects Council or in the union, or you would meet in classes, so that it was different from being in a Broadway show. When you're in a Broadway show, the only time the actors are together with everybody is during the rehearsal period and during the out-of-town tryout. And that's when you go out at night after the show. Now, when the show opens on Broadway, everybody goes home after the show. You only see the actors when you do the show. Here, we never really left each other, involved in one way or another almost all the time, so that it became in some ways it was bad. You met people you didn't like, you see the same people all the time you didn't like, but on the whole it was the basis of a newspaper came out of the fact that if I worked on a newspaper, on the wall newspaper, I was getting articles from people in the theater. And then I was reading everything else that was going on in the project. And then it would be a volunteer group that put the paper together. So that it was always involved in creative work of some kind. And I know that even going on a delegation, you're going on a delegation for everybody's job, not just your own. It was opening and expanding worlds that I had never seen before. And I'm sure for many of the actors, it was an extraordinary new experience because they were not used to fighting on that level on Broadway.
Yeah.
They've never even thought about it. And I think that it must have helped stimulate actors' equity later on to fight for better conditions. It worked it was like throwing a stone in or a pebble in a pond and everything rippling out after. Nothing that we did was done in a way that it had no effect on anything else. Everything that was done at the Federal Theater Project later changed the face of the theater in one way or another, so that the living newspaper, which seemed to die with the project, didn't really die with the project. I was in the first living newspaper professionally that was done.
Medicine Show.
Medicine Show.
I want to ask you about that.
Julie Dassin directed. It was his first play that he ever directed on Broadway. And that ran about 9 weeks, but that was with Dorothy McGuire, whom I have not acted with until last year when I did a show with her called Runaways. But it did make a contribution to theater. It enlarged the horizon of all of us who are in it. I think it deeply affected all of us. I feel a great kinship to a John Houseman, whom merely because of his experience, or anybody who was on the Federal Theater, if I meet them, like talking to Hallie Jonas downstairs, something about you coming here. I see her eyes begin to brighten up, and she talked about something I hadn't even thought about, Chalkdust and Virgil Geddes and all of these people. So that we are tapping a source, even in myself, that still affects me. The very fact that I would be excited by about the Federal Theater or the National Theater, my attitude towards that, the fact that I'm on the board of directors, Screen Actors Guild, on the Council of Actors' Equity, that I could stimulate movement in that direction. I never thought I would have any effect on anybody, you see. But it does linger. That Joe Shea of the Chicago, Vice President of the Midwest Advisory Board of Equity, would write a letter to me only last week. I didn't even know you were going to come. Saying, John, we're interested in the Federal Theater here. Equity is now interested in the Federal Theater, I understand. When we were together in Death of a Salesman, you talked about your experience on the WPA, and I thought that was exciting, and I'd like to know more about it, and who do I contact? And I said, George Mason.
Yeah.
See, I don't. And I'm going to get him. He should be on the mailing list. Your mailing list. These are ripples that go over a period of 40 years.
Yeah.
How do you erase those ripples? You can't erase them.
It's a part of the history.
If it in any way now will contribute to a new renaissance in American theater, in film, in art, in dance, in symphony orchestras, in street theater, in black theater, in Spanish theater, if it reaches out in the new areas as the Federal Theater did in those days. Because the Federal Theater, I remember the German language theater. There was a guy who was in charge of that German language theater who was in the theater collective. And a very progressive guy who came from the left-wing theater, expressionistic theater in Germany, and he went into that. And there was a Yiddish language theater, and they were beginning to do things. The Yiddish theater was dead for years. And when I went up to Harlem to see the Lafayette Theater, to see Turpentine, and to see the Black Macbeth, and my God, it was extraordinary creative work that was being done. I went all over. I saw everything that I could. I saw Murder in the Cathedral, and I wanted to get into the classical theater, but I wasn't a classical actor. I was a New Yorker.
Yeah.
So they put me in the rough things, like Rough, Tough, and Gruff, right?
Yeah. Did you, speaking about this place, I didn't know that you went to the Black Macbeth, and were there particular plays the Federal Theater did that you just think are outstanding?
Yes, I think that Big White Fog by Theodore Ward, whom I have still remained in contact with, and still get letters from, and encourage him to write. He sent me a script about John Brown. He sent me an original script he wrote about the middle class. I tried to get that script peddled. I'm not involved in any theater group anymore, so I feel a little inept about it, a little helpless. But he wrote Big White Fog, which I thought was an extraordinary play, so creative and so dynamic. I loved Gus Smith's Turpentine, which was the first time that workers were put on the stage, black workers, and what I loved was the amount of black people that came to the theater. I mean, that was fantastic. There's always room. You pay 25 cents, and for $1 you got the very best seat in the house. Then you were stimulating a whole new generation of theater goers. That's another thing. It's not just jobs for actors and dancers and writers. What about the audience that is subjected, that is exposed to creative work different from television and movies, but the live theater, which is that today is going on under CETA here in Los Angeles. We got a call from an actor named Don Hanmer, who's a very good actor, very famous, not famous, but he's a good actor. And he got on the CETA project and doing Shakespeare and going around to Los Angeles and black areas and the old age homes and doing free theater and talking about the excitement of communicating this kind of theater to people who've never seen theater in the black areas. I've been to places in Los Angeles. I lived here all my life. I never realized existed. And to see the looks on the faces of those people when they see theater, when they meet the actors, and they would never go to the theater. They couldn't afford to, or not here in Los Angeles. We go to them. Now, here's an actor talking on the phone for 1 hour to my wife about this kind of theater, and he's not saying, I got a lousy agent. Oh, Jesus Christ, John, how can I change my agent? And, I only worked 2 weeks this year. I got a job. I got a great job. I'm getting 3 weeks. No, we're not talking about people, communications. You're talking about anxieties and depression and wanting to get a job and who's the best agent, how do you break through, and all of the things that have nothing to do with acting, nothing to do with the joy of working in the creative arts. So that at least I know if I do a television show, if I do a movie like I'm doing King Kong now, it'll be seen by, hundreds of millions of people. If I do a television show, I know it'll be seen by millions and millions of people, like many of the shows I've been on. Yet, at the same time, I will always go back to New York to do a play, or I've done 3 plays here for the Gordon Davidson at a low salary and lose a lot of money doing it. And your agent thinks you're crazy, and at the same time, the agent has to understand that that's where you got your training. That's why you're considered different or a good actor. And I refused to fall into cliche molds. Because when I came out, as you know, I told you before, I was blacklisted for 15 years out here because I was a hostile witness against the House coming in on American activities, and I couldn't work anywhere else but in the theater. And the theater, to its credit, was the one place where we were able to get a clause in the contract, an anti-blacklist clause, so that no actor would be discriminated against because of race, religion, political affiliation, or any other reason, see. Now, that we got in because of the blacklisting, and that I feel I'm responsible for. Eli Wallach and Lee Grant worked out a thing with the left-wing caucus of getting a clause in that would protect actors, at least in the theater.
So they could at least
so they
stay
could
in the
work,
profession.
yeah, so that you could stay in the profession. But I've never forgotten my theater work, and it's important to me, and I have to do theater work all the time.
What do you think is you've mentioned so many different aspects of the federal theater and theater in general, and what the federal theater did. Which do you think that one is more important than the other? The audience, entertainment, art, all those things, are they all?
Well, I think that obviously they're all blended together. You can't eliminate one or pick out the one factor that is more important than another. Certainly the bringing together the creative artists to use their talents, to use their skills in a society that was hungry for entertainment, hungry for something that would fill a need to release their emotions and to be part of something creative. The audience who had never been exposed to that, because people love theater and they love songs and they love dancing and they love everything. I mean, that's what life is. If you were to eliminate all of that, eliminate every movie house, eliminate every television station, eliminate every dance company, every symphony orchestra, every stage play, every poetry, book on poetry, every book on plays of Shakespeare, eliminate all of that from our life. And you say, wow, how dull it would be. No joy, no singing, no dancing, no music, nothing, no acting. Why, it would be terrible. No tape recorders, no records. You would have a life that would be devoid of any joy. So it's part of every culture. I think what it did is reached into aspects of our culture we didn't know existed, and into creativity in a line of daringness and doing things that no other country in the world, despite their tremendous theater history, whether it was the Soviet Union or whether it was England or whether it was Germany, where lots of creative work came out of. Our creative work took on a new aspect, the living newspaper, which was something had never been thought of before. The daring to do something like suitcase theater because of the long distances. You'd have to travel on subway. So you take a theater, take the subway circuit. Theaters that were portable, like the Children's Theater, that was so creative that could travel anywhere in a truck, was something that was new, using natural parks and hollows so that people could sit around, and you have 25,000 people and portable equipment. All of those came out of that kind of need to create without any facilities at all. How do you do it when you first start from scratch? And so you bring together all of this and you find this resurgence of creativity that was full of kind of a dynamism of the period. And out of the ashes of the Depression came this phoenix of creativity, you see.
And you talk so much about the positive end. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the problems.
Well, all right. Well, the problems are very obvious, and the problems were bureaucracy and the kind of thinking of Congress people who were ready to cut the project, like, if I remember, a guy named Lambertson of Kansas who didn't know what all these Reds were doing on the project, like Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe, was Faust, that was a Red communist that's how ignorant they were. That was always a burden. It was always sending delegations to Washington. Then the red tape and that must have handicapped Hallie Flanagan to an extraordinary the pressure from all over. For every project wanted to keep its personnel. And all I remember is a lot of time was wasted in the bureaucracy of ineptness and corruptness that would creep in of people, favoritism, using certain people all the time. And how do you solve that problem? Well, that would exist in any repertory theater, but we were not used to it. We didn't have that kind of... There was a theater union, yes, and there was Eva Le Gallien's group, and those were people who were pioneers in their field. But they had gotten their actors through sifting through long periods, and they knew who they wanted and who they didn't. Here, the Federal Theater was shoved together with people of different schooling, different background, and that was a tough thing. But I remember mostly the difficulty of the layoffs, the kicking people out, the uncertainty of how long you would be able to work, the pressure of that kind of shifting people from one project to another without any consultation with their supervisors. And so I think it was a new form, and therefore it suffered from that. You can stimulate me if you have any ideas.
Well, I have one question on it. There was a problem with the special interest groups, unions, who some people have told us, or we've had the impression that these were more of a burden than a benefit, because they would slow down productions or they would picket like as you did. But do you think that in general they were more of a help to the federal theater than
I think that they were fighting for their life, and the congressmen who wanted to cut down on the bureaucracy in Washington, wanted to cut the funds out, had no interest in anything creative. Don't forget, there's a new breed that exists today, different from that breed in those days. They represented farmers in some rural area, or they represented some what they call a working class in Chicago or something, and they didn't think that they were interested in anything in North Dakota or in Kansas or in art, culture. What the hell was that, you know? So that the only ones who could fight, and the only way you could fight, was by organizing the people who originally were disorganized. And what you were fighting for was not revolution. You were fighting for the jobs to remain that way and for the money to be kept into the project so that we could continue with the creative work that was being done. The jobs were generating this country out of a depression anyway. And there was no conflict, I think, with the theater owners, because there were a lot of theaters that were empty, that weren't being used. And it never, at first, it may have been forces at work, like theater owners who didn't want the government to go into business, producers who thought that government going into the business of production would take away from their audiences. But I think, strangely enough, it never did that. If anything, it stimulated a whole new group of people who wanted to go to the theater, so they didn't see a federal theater, so they spent more money and went to see another play. I think that all of the fears were unfounded. And I believe that the formation of the union, the City Projects Council, the Workers' Alliance, I think it was, but the City Projects Council is all I remember, was designed to protect the interests of the people working on the project. And the interests were, how do you fight bureaucracy? How do you fight against the influence of people who are sitting at a desk 1,000 miles away or 300 miles away and dictating your life? You understand? But to me, I have no recollection of whether Actors' Equity, was detrimental to the project, or whether when they say unions, there were people who objected to the City Projects Council and the unions being formed on a project, that they thought that was un-American, or they thought it was unpatriotic. How could you do it when the government was helping you out, organizing against the government? You weren't organizing against a boss, a private producer. You were organizing against the government. And that never bothered me, but I guess you'll get different points of view. I thought they were tremendously helpful.
Well, I was thinking, most especially the Workers' Alliance, which was caused a number of problems, say, for George Randolph, who was the director of New York City later on in the project. And want to turn it off for a while?
No, my wife just came in, and she's a gorgeous, wonderful woman, and we've been married for a long time. And old Sarah Cunningham, I'm glad she came in, and we'll talk to her later.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The project was closed because of the Dice Committee's statement that there was communistic influence. And I wonder if you could tell me whether you think that was a true statement, that there was communists in the project and they were creating communist drama.
Well, there were communists all through the fabric of American life, and the communists were the first ones to demonstrate for unemployment insurance and for home relief, and all of which were considered un-American. That a good American just starved. If he didn't work, then it means he was lazy. You see? So I remember the communists in those days, and I was not a member of the Communist Party in those days, that they were pretty well organized. It was only a small group. Naturally, you can't bring 10,000 people together and think that they're all communists. They weren't. It was just a small group. But wherever they were the hardest workers. They were the most idealistic, I guess. They probably had more background and knowledge of what this could possibly be, because I had no concepts of any kind. They were the only ones who seemed to be fighting very hard to maintain the projects, to keep it going. So what was a dirty name to a lot of people, it was not a dirty name to me, because some of the people that I knew who were, later on it became known, I know who were members of the Communist Party, and who were involved in the project, and were very, very principled people. I didn't hear anybody telling me to take a bomb and overthrow the government, or they weren't doing that. They were just trying to organize. They had a deeper insight, I think, into what we were involved historically. Mm-hmm. In other words, today I have what I call a historical perspective, which I've learned from those days, and enables you to fight without getting angry, and enables you to laugh when you see injustice because you're doing something about it. But you have to have a long view, and you have to be able to see things in their true perspective. Well, I didn't, in those days, I couldn't have been less involved in anything except me, you know. I then got involved with other people. That was healthy. That was very exciting. And I always loved people. I like people, and I enjoy meeting people, and I think there's a tremendous beauty in human beings. Most of them. I don't think people are lousy and people are selfish, and they just kind of have to hustle in our country to keep alive. But I found my great joy and my great strength as a human being is in other people, not just in me. Mm-hmm. And so I loved the experience of the project. It hit a chord in me, a social chord. Mm-hmm. And the so-called communists who were involved, certainly in the project, as there were Republicans and Democrats and everybody else, but you were in the middle of a depression. You were challenging the system with falling apart. What were you going to do is, if you didn't think about that, man, you didn't have a brain. Mm-hmm. If you didn't think of why 17 million human beings were unemployed and starving and hungry and families breaking up in the richest country of the world, then there was nothing in you of any worth or any value. And I thought a great deal about that, and I was stimulated by the people who had answers to this, mm-hmm. or who gave me an understanding of this, period. And the communists were amongst those. There were socialists who also were amongst them, and there may have been liberals who felt very deeply about it. But not everybody was communist. That was nonsense. And to show you the level of the thinking was this guy, Lambertson. I'm sure that they called Flanagan and somebody to want to know about that kind of communist project. I don't remember what it was, but I thought it was Christopher Marlowe and Faust.
Right, they said.
And that was one of the big laughs of the project, that this kind of idiot brain, representing some people in Kansas, didn't know who the hell Christopher Marlowe was. I suppose the next one would be Shakespeare. Who was Shakespeare? The Red, you see. Yeah. Anything. Now, these are guys who talked about boondoggling and wasting time and people getting money just like butts today. Talking about people getting food stamps where able-bodied men go out on strike and then they get food stamps where the government is giving them the food to eat while they go against their employers. That's ridiculous. We ought to cut that out. And I listened to a guy like that yesterday on radio. Secretary of Agriculture, talking the same way that Lambertson talked about us on the project. They didn't want to work. They're lazy. WPA, people just anxious to get some money from the government while they sat around and smoked gauge and screwed those girls and his orgies on the project and all that kind of stuff. We heard all that stuff. And it was nonsense. I found it just the opposite of what Representative Lambertson thought about the project. And as far as communists, yes, there were communists on the project. And they were one of the leading organizers of some of the good things. Now,
it sounds like they helped rather than...
Yeah, I think the whole red herring thing, which took off during McCarthy era, and the Federal Theater was considered, like, part of that background was considered part of your red background. Lumping all of those thousands of people together as if you were all part of a communist conspiracy was part of the McCarthy era and part of the thing you had to fight against. And the thinking, and today, of course, everybody sees it in a much different light. I think that the communists were constructive and not destructive. They were not evil people. They were very fine people, made a lot of sacrifices. And I don't care. Today I would say the same thing if they called me up and said, "Hey, John, we heard tape. You said some good things about communists. Now, who are these people you're hanging around with? And can you give us their names? And are you a communist?" And I'd say, "Well, screw you, boys. I've none of your business what I am. I voted for everything in my life. I voted Democrat, Republican, Communist, Socialist. I voted them all. And I will, to this day, do what I want to do independently, but none of your damn business. And if you want to fire me or get rid of me, and I can't work in movies, and screw that." In other words, my attitude is I'm going to live. And as long as I'm going to live, I'm going to do what I feel is the right thing to do as a human being. I'm not going to unlearn the lessons I learned about what democracy really is and what this country really stands for. Because I think those people who wrap themselves up in a flag and lynch a Negro are not the kind of Americans that I really sympathize with, particularly. Or Mr. Agnew or Mr. Nixon, who are corrupt in the White House as leaders and call the young people vagabonds and dangerous people and talk about law and order, and they're the ones who are breaking the law and breaking the order, not the young people who are against the war in Vietnam. So my sympathies are all with the people who really believe in what this country stands for. And I believe in every principle I was brought up to believe in it, and I'm not going to give it up for money's sake or expediency or anything else.
You think then that...
That was like speech.
That was very good. Sounds like it was... Do you think the Federal Theater then was a very successful adventure? And you talked about what it achieved. Do you think it failed anywhere? Or do you think...
I think it was expanding. I think it was growing. I think it was developing. Any failure occurred, it was cut off so brutally by Congress in steps. In other words, your leg was sawed off just as you got, then the arm was sawed off. And they didn't do it like if they cut the whole project off dead immediately, maybe you wouldn't have had some of the chaos that did exist when the cuts took place. But always I remember cuts, fighting always against Washington orders, bureaucracy, red tape, trying to get a designer and not getting it because you couldn't get the transfer put in, and all of the delays that took place, in spite of which we were able to do an extraordinary amount of work. So I feel that it was successful. Certainly it was enormously successful in what it did. It's pioneering. It's going in the states that didn't have theater, that indicated that you could have a black theater in Seattle, you could have a black theater, a Negro theater in Dallas, that you could have theater in Maine, where it wasn't existing, that you could open a play in 20 different communities the same day with 60 actors at a time, having a gala across the land opening of a play that was against fascism. think Sinclair Lewis is a champion here. What a wonderful thing. I got to thinking after meeting you yesterday, what a wonderful thing it would be if we formed a theater that would just dedicate itself to these things during the next couple of years, doing plays either that have done that period that were historic, or doing some of the plays that never got a chance to be produced because they were aborted before they